border numbers being virtually zero these days, they'll have more space, because usually the border facilities would be full as people coming in, and then they spread them out. So now they're doing sort of the opposite, but there's the bonus. So
okay,
yeah.
thanks.
Oh, sure. Yeah, sure.
Hi, Margaret.
Hi, Mel. How are you?
I'm doing fine.
Look great.
You too.
You had to say that.
You're such a troublemaker still.
Wouldn't you be disappointed if I weren't? Steve, you look so serious.
I'm very serious, and it is almost time to start. It's time to start. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Stephen Cash. I'm the Executive Director of the Steady State, and thank you for joining us this morning. Looks like we have around 17 people on the call. Let me quickly introduce what we're doing today. This is the first of what we hope will be a series of on-the-record briefings from experts from the Steady State. We're calling them quick hits. This one is going to be focusing on recent reporting about the rendition or deportation. We'll talk a little bit about the difference between those two things and how that affects both national security issues, legal issues, our relationship with our allies and our friends overseas. Very quickly, what the Steady State is, it's a group of around 275, mostly formers, as we call them, from the national security community. We're made up largely of veterans at very senior levels of the Department of State, of elements in the intelligence community, of the Department of Homeland Security. We have a lot of people with years and years of experience in national security issues writ large in our group. We were formed because of concerns about the path that we see this administration taking and the nation taking in connection with the areas we know most about, which is national security. And with all of that, I am going to quickly turn it over to our panel members. And the rules of the game today are, we are on the record. I'm going to ask all of our panel members to quickly introduce themselves, starting with Ms. Doyle. They can decide how they want to be addressed. And we'll go from there. Each is going to just talk for a minute or two once we get through who's on. And then we're going to open it up to questions. I hopefully will be able to manage the calling on people by raising their hand. And we'll figure that out as we go along. So without further ado, why don't we start with Ms. Doyle?
Great. Thank you, Steve. I'm Carrie Doyle. I've been in the immigration and law space for about 30 years. I served as the general counsel or principal legal advisor for immigration customs enforcement under the Biden administration for 3+ years. I also served as an acting and then permanent deputy general counsel for DHS writ large. And then most recently, after leaving the Biden administration, I was a career immigration judge for a couple months, and then I got fired by the administration. So now I'm back to practice. Thank you.
Let me turn to Mel.
Hi, I'm Mel Gamble, and I'm a retired CIA officer. Served 40 years in the agency, 20 of those overseas, ranging from Africa to Mexico to managing the Central Asia and the Caucasus area, fun area, and worked with one of my colleagues, Margaret, who's on this. I was deputy chief of our European operations and chief of Africa. So.
And let's turn to Jonathan Weiner. You're muted.
Hi there. I was the special envoy for Libya in the Obama administration and deputy assistant secretary of state for international law enforcement back in the Clinton administration.
And then before we go to Eric, I see we have Mr. Budzinski. You're up and you're muted. There you go.
Yes, good morning. Sorry, I was attaching or clicking on the wrong link, so I missed the question, but I'm ready.
Who are you? There's
I'm
the
Jacek
question.
Boleshinsky. I'm Associate Professor of Politics, International Relations at Pomona College, former Foreign Service Officer, former Pentagon, and former Congressional Advisor.
And then Eric Rubin.
Hi, lots of familiar people here. Good to see you. I'm Eric Rubin. I retired a year and a half ago after 38 years in the Foreign Service. My last overseas job was ambassador to Bulgaria. My last job before I retired was for 4 years the elected president of the American Foreign Service Association, the union and professional association of the Foreign Service in 5 agencies, which is now under siege. And before that, I also served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Europe and Deputy Chief of Mission in Moscow.
So I think we've gone through our panel. We're going to turn it over to Carrie Doyle again. I just want to remind everyone we are on the record. In the future, we have lots of expertise. If any of you on this call are interested in speaking with some of our experts, please just reach out. You can reach out to me, and we can almost definitely make that happen. But right now, let's talk about the substance. Carrie, you're up.
Sure, great. Thank you, Steve. So just briefly, I think it's very clear that this idea of what I would call rendition, not removal, because from the number of people that were sent to El Salvador under a similar scheme, a number of them were either granted relief in the United States, may not have final orders. So I don't think we can call it deportation. I'm very concerned about people being sent to countries with significant human rights violations. Those here that know more about Libya than I do can explain more, but there's a very open trafficking of humans going on in Libya, of refugees arriving there. And not to mention that courts have determined that individuals need a right to claim fear from the countries that they would be deported to, because most of these people would not have been deported to Libya. And, this wholesale and very aggressive rendition of individuals just, undermines our systems, undermines our due process, and undermines our national security.
Mel?
I'm going to talk about Rwanda, or can answer most questions, hopefully, on Rwanda and the relationship with the U.S. As many of you may know, Paul Kagame, the president of Rwanda, really saved that country in 1994 with the genocide. There were about 800,000 people that were killed during that period. I won't get into a lot of detail of it, but basically the Hutus were the group that ran the country, and started the murders that occurred there. Paul Kagame came in. He's a Tutsi. The Hutus make up about 85% of that country, and the Tutsis only 14%. But Kagame came in, defeated the Hutus, and really, to his credit, he's managed that country very well. I've met him a couple of times. We've discussed the country and the issues. The problem is, like all of these guys, they come in and they want to stay. And I always have this theory, if they get in after 5 years, they'll stay 20 to 25 years, but then they're going to be gone. So you can count on him. There's a point where he's going to be gone, and there's a point that Putin is going to be gone, because he's about at that 20, 25-year mark. But the main point is that he has a horrible human rights record, and he's looking for friends. He's had some advocates. What's her name? Rice, who was the Assistant Secretary for African Affairs, is one of his principal supporters. So he has some strong relationships here in the U.S. But at the same time, Rwanda is not the place that they should be sending renditions or deportees, as one might say. there's a long history. I won't go into that, but there are a number of countries that have tried this, what the U.S. is currently trying to do, and I can talk a little bit about that at some point.
So let's turn to Jonathan. You're muted.
Thanks. A week ago, we heard news reports that there was going to be an immediate flight to Libya from the United States of people who were being described as deportees. But of course, there were people being rendered to Libya, not being deported to Libya. Both governments, one we recognize and the one we don't recognize, said, no, we had nothing to do with it. We didn't authorize it. It's not happening. It's not appropriate. For background, some of the sons of Libyan warlord Khalifa Haftar had been in Washington a couple of days before this announcement happened. So take that as you will. They were met by people at both the White House and the State Department, and then this announcement happened. Now, what are prisons like in Libya? Well, right now there's a huge scandal in Libya because a parliamentarian who used to be close to the Haftars, but was seen as criticizing them by one of the sons, allegedly, has video of him in shackles, manacles, chains, boils all over his face, looking absolutely brutalized. And this particular video is making the rounds, and his condition is representative of the general conditions in Libyan militia-run prisons, which essentially they're run by Islamist militias or by warlord militias, depending on location and which group it is. They're doing it as a business, and the experience of the prisons involves routinely things like sexual assault, beatings, torture. I mentioned the manacles. They lack everything: clean water, clean food, sewage winds up going on into the prison cells has been reported. Killings, torture, rape. It's a very, very bad situation. And essentially every human rights group that covers prisons and covers Libya has said the same thing. There's consensus that it's really bad. And sending somebody there would be sending someone to a place where they would experience torture and abuse. And needless to say, this is not in accord with anyone's due process rights. Back when I was tasked for international law enforcement, there were a lot of things we could not do with people we didn't want in the United States. And certainly that would include rendition to Libya.
Let's turn to Mia.
Thanks. Agreeing with everything that Jonathan said on Libya. I served in Libya as an FSO after Gaddafi, and then have written about it as an academic. Libya is a dangerous place for Libyans to begin with, right? It's not a safe country, and it's certainly not a safe country for others. Whether that's migrants coming through from sub-Saharan Africa, as Jonathan highlighted, a disproportionate amount of women, for instance, have been subjected to various kinds of sexual abuse and most horrific human rights abuses. The Eastern Libyan government, on top of that, insofar as allegedly we're talking to them, it's an unrecognized government, and elements from that government have been indicted by the ICC for war crimes and crimes against humanity, not to mention extensive documentation of other abuses. But even in the West, in the internationally recognized government, there are militias run the show. And I think what's so egregious here for me, from the values perspective, and this goes for the El Salvador deal and so on, is that we can have a spirited debate about the extent to which we engage with an abusive government, but by making these migration-based deals, we are becoming part of their system of repression, and I think that's just betraying everything we stand for.
Last but not least, Eric, and then we'll open it up to questions.
Thank you. Let me take sort of the global perspective on this. This is devastating to our standing in the world. This totally undermines any ability of the United States to advocate for human rights, for democracy, for rule of law, for refugees. we already are living in a glass house, and a lot of countries are really not interested in hearing our lectures about human rights and democracy. But if we do something like this, which is so flagrantly in violation of international law, I'll let Kerry address domestic American law, but there's no question that what's being proposed is exactly what the other panelists said: renditions, not deportations. You can only deport someone to their own country. So if maybe there are 2 or 3 Libyans who are theoretically going to be included in that, okay, that's a deportation. Although international law also says that the receiving government has to agree to receive their citizens. And, as we were just discussing, Jonathan mentioned, neither of the 2 feuding Libyan governments has agreed to accept these citizens. So this would be flagrantly illegal, never mind what would happen to these people. It's definitely intended to terrorize and instill fear in people, to get them, for example, to take the self-deportation offer that is on the table now, which is not approved by Congress or funded by Congress, just to mention. So, this makes it very hard, and I've been a critic of our human rights advocacy because it has been so hypocritical and uneven and inconsistent. But there have been some basic red lines, as Jonathan mentioned, and one of them is we don't do renditions of people. And should be noted, many of these people are not felons. Many of them have not committed and been convicted of a misdemeanor. Yes, some of them may have been. Many of them have just committed the administrative violation of crossing the border without permission. And the idea that you would send someone to be tortured in a hellhole prison for something less than a misdemeanor is horrific too. So I'll leave it there. Glad to answer more questions.
Okay, the floor is open. Hopefully I will be able to see hands raised, and thank you, Brandy Buckman.
Yes, hi, this is Brandy Buckman with HuffPost. I'm asking this question because I feel that as a journalist, I'm at an impasse right now, and with your institutional experience, perhaps you can assist. One of the issues that I'm running into as I'm reporting on these seemingly illegal deportations and rendition issues with the Trump administration is that when I reach out to Congress members, they pretty much just provide a boilerplate response. We're doing the best we can, we're doing everything we can, and it's pretty much left at that. And I'm wondering if you have any suggestions for things that the press can do to increase pressure on Congress to raise these issues or get more serious about them. Any insights you have, I'd really appreciate.
Anybody want to take that one?
Steve, I'll take it just quickly to start. It's really important that you educate your readers about the legalities involved, the historical context, and the HuffPost does this. I'm not criticizing or saying you don't, but it's very important not to do the administration says it has the right to do this, but others criticize. Anyone who reads the law will know what's legal and what's not. And I think it's really important for journalists to say, I'm pretty smart. I'm a successful journalist. I went to college. I can read the law. This is illegal. Says me. Not to say he said, she said. That would be my comment.
Carrie?
Thank you.
Yeah, so I would suggest, and I think you'll get a little more traction, and we often do when we're doing advocacy for clients for cases as well, is to go to the member from where the person lives. So, they live in the 5th district in Maryland, like those members would potentially be more likely to actually be willing or interested in making a larger statement on the case. Of course, we're having the problem with the majority in the House and Senate not necessarily wanting to stand up for things that are happening, and certainly not want to put their head above the parapet on immigration, which is a challenging topic for everybody. But that would be my suggestion.
I have one specific suggestion in addition, which is the Helsinki Commission, which is not a congressional committee. It's a commission. It's bipartisan. It's bicameral. They came up with the Magnitsky Act, which combines corruption and human rights abuse. And Libyan prisons are a perfect case study for Magnitsky Act sanctions, actually. given the combination of corruption and human rights abuse that keeps them going. And so I would urge outreach to the 4 chairs, the chair and ranking members of Helsinki Commission and their staff as one place to go.
Let me turn to Jose. Good to see you. And hi, Brandy. I never said hello to you. But Jose, you're up.
Hi there, everybody. Can you hear me and see me?
We can.
Perfect. So I've got a 3-part question.
Can you identify yourself? I don't know where you're
Oh,
from.
absolutely. Sorry about that. It's Jose Palieri. I'm the justice reporter at Notice, stands for News of the United States. I've spent quite a bit of time in the courtroom in the Abrego Garcia case, as well as JGG and others across the country. So I've got a 3-part question. They don't all have to be answered by one person. The first is there a historical analogy here for this kind of rendition? Have we seen the United States do this in the past in any capacity? I'm curious how that played out. The second question I've got is what exactly do these handoffs look like exactly when a plane lands in Rwanda or Libya or even in Ukraine? I mean, what does that look like? Who's there to receive these people? Do they get immediately ferried off to a prison? Who's there? And then I asked that because we saw how that played out in El Salvador, where some of the guards said, "Oh, we didn't expect women. We didn't take the women back." So I'm curious how these things might play out. And then the third question I've got is it stems from my reporting in court as of late, which is who technically has custody of these people? Certainly the United States government does now, but when we hand them off, is there some legal paperwork that gets signed? Does someone agree to the fact that a particular person or entity in Libya or Rwanda has legal custody of these people? Because I foresee that at some point, some federal judge, some Article 3 judge is going to say, send these people back. And then we're going to be in the same place we are with Abrego Garcia, where the Trump administration might say, well, we don't know who to talk to.
Okay, 3 questions. Who wants to take that?
All right, I'll start because a couple were kind of immigration related
For
ICE. Historical analogy. Yes, between I think 29 and 39, we expelled hundreds of thousands to millions of Mexicans, Mexican Americans that were living in the United States. It's quite a stain on our nation's history, as some of our other things we've done in the past. But in more recent times, no. I mean, please be aware that there are times, and this loops us back to national security issues, where there's someone the government will determine shouldn't be in the United States. They pose a danger to the United States, and again, often related to national security, who will be placed in a third country through agreement with that country. And frankly, I think those large-scale renditions are going to undermine our ability to do that, and it's very important to be able to do that in some circumstances. So, and there's limited number of countries that are willing to work with us to assist when we have national security cases that we need help with. Again, I would say the expulsions really just harken back to some very dark times in our history. And now they are required. We are a signer, and we've also ratified the Torture Convention. So the Convention Against Torture, we are not allowed to deport or remove or render someone to a place they would be tortured. That's a violation of our laws and international law. Also, we have other non-refoulement, non-return agreements, obligations as well. As far as what it looks like, so yes, I mean, returning individuals to their countries and doing removals is a pretty, standard process that Immigration Customs Enforcement engages in really on a daily basis. So I think that it would look very similar to any other removal that they would do. And they're handed over to officers, officials from the other country. When they land on the tarmac, they get a travel document and information that's handed over for each person, and their personal goods are handed over to each person. I think to your point, a place like Libya, where it's unclear what government, if any, exists in what part of the country, is obviously much more complicated. And again, others can speak to that better than I can. And as far as the custody of the people, I guess I would just say, please don't be bamboozled, is that a good word, by the current administration. That, I mean, we have brought people back. We brought people back under the Biden administration. People were brought back in the prior administrations on a regular basis. There's, not hundreds, but on a very regular basis was requested to bring someone back. Sometimes they were just, in the country and we had to locate them and so forth. But make no mistake, if we've got enough influence to get this country to agree to take large numbers of people, we have enough influence to say, please send this X person back. But yes, to your point, I wouldn't be surprised, particularly a place like Libya, where it's unclear who runs what for this government to then, this administration to then claim that there's nothing they can do if people need to come back.
Jose, to your question on just on the precedent really quickly, and I'd like to point to two things, but there's colleagues on the call who probably can provide a correction in terms of the usefulness of the analogy in terms of legal authorities or lack thereof. So one would be the extraordinary renditions during the height of the global war on terror, right, which included bringing people to black sites, which has now been extensively publicly reported. But another one that I've dealt with personally as a diplomat, U.S. diplomat, were the Guantanamo detainees who were relocated to third countries. Again, an imperfect analogy. In those cases, there was, in cooperation with the receiving country, there was a system set up for them to sort of integrate themselves, however imperfectly. But those are the two I would think of.
The Guantanamo experience is quite relevant here because the administration has learned from Guantanamo. In Guantanamo, they were there. The people that we brought from overseas to Guantanamo were put there in order to avoid having U.S. legal rights attached to them. So it was a work around the U.S. legal system to keep them in Guantanamo. Of course, some of them have now been there for nearly a quarter of a century, just short of that, with no solution in sight for those remaining. So it's a legal limbo. But the problem is that the U.S. court system said there's still some due process rights and still some requirements that attach, even if they're not under the direct jurisdiction of the United States, you still have control over them. By sending them to Libya, you're able to shrug your shoulders, as the administration did on Salvador, and say nothing we can do about it. Of course, in Salvador, they're being paid for by the United States. So the very simple solution would be to cut off the spigot, to have Congress say, no, you can't spend your money this way, or the court say it, and then tell the Salvadorans that you want to keep them, fine, you're paying for them. We don't want them there, we want you to return them. Our courts said return them. And of course, that's what would actually happen. I went through this recently in Libya when someone I'd been working with was kidnapped for ransom. He was the head of the Libyan Asset Recovery Management Office. They were trying to get control of Libya's stolen assets, the people who kidnapped him. And ultimately, there was enough political pressure brought to bear that he was released after being illegally held. And I would emphasize completely illegally, but for nearly 3 months. So in the case of Libya, if you got off the plane, you're going to be grabbed by whichever militia you're going to send you to prison at the airport and trundled off. It's top-down militia leadership, and that would be that. The courts are not particularly going to be paid attention to, and the courts in Libya are iffy at best, with some of them directly compromised or directly subordinate to political decisions, as we saw in the case of the head of the Libyan Asset Recovery Management Office earlier this year. So essentially, you're being dropped off regardless of paperwork, regardless of oversight. I can't imagine you being given your things particularly. You're not going to keep your things at a Libyan prison. You're going to be put in a situation where you have no rights and are at grave risk in every imaginable respect.
And if I could just add, Carrie's comment about the Mexicans and Mexican Americans, American citizens who were deported across the border in that horrific period. Woody Guthrie wrote a song about that called Deportee, but it should be noted that the Mexican citizens who were deported were illegally deported to their country of origin. The American citizens who were deported, obviously, that was an outrage. But we're not talking about that here. We're talking about rendition. Again, as I said, if there are 2 or 3 Libyans who the administration wants to send back to Libya, they still need the approval of one of the Libyan governments. But we're not talking about that. And I think we have to really insist on looking at this. The second thing is this whole discussion of habeas corpus. This is just the tip of the iceberg, but the Constitution is pretty clear about suspending habeas corpus, and it makes pretty clear that it's Congress that has to approve that, and it has to be in case of a very serious national security emergency. And I would actually argue that the tremendous decline in illegal border crossings on the border makes it very hard to say that this is a national security emergency. So I would hope that journalists would really probe that hard.
Michelle Kelman, you've had your hand up a while, but I see Mel does all. But let's go to Michelle and then come back to Mel. Is that all right? I said it's so it's all right. Go ahead. You're muted, Michelle, I think. No, you're still muted. There you go. No, we have no audio from you. Maybe I suggest you go out, come back in, and we'll have Mel answer the other question while you're doing that, and let's see if we have some audio from you. Or I guess you could put it in the chat.
Okay. I just want to actually follow on to what Eric and Jonathan and others have said about this, just to sort of give you an insight into the Rwanda aspect of it all. I suspect that the Trump administration has looked at the Israelis had an agreement with the Rwandans back in 2014 and 17 to transport Eritrean and Sudanese asylum seekers who had gone to Israel to try to settle. And they cut a deal with the Rwandans to take care of these people. There were about 4,000 of them that there. The Rwandans, I suspect, are in it for the money. And so they had set up a system, a system where they would meet these people and then process them through. But basically what the Rwandans did was they got them there, and then they started shipping them off to Uganda and other locations. Or the people, when they arrived there, started to move, find other places to go to, because basically Rwanda, they don't have any jobs for these people or lifestyle. So they moved on. I'm certain Jonathan can probably talk about that, because they also received a number of people from the Libyans that the Libyans had picked up, and these people were trying to go to Europe at that point. But this was in 2019, where there were about 2,400 people that the Libyans had sent to Rwanda to settle. And the Rwandans again moved them on. So there's a lot of historical situations, the most recent being the UK, who tried to set up a similar deal with the Rwandans about taking illegal immigrants there. But just from a legal perspective too, one of the things I would ask, or I think is a dangerous precedent for the Trump administration, is if they're prepared to do that, then if Americans are arrested and detained, then will the country send them to Iran or Russia or China or North Korea just to get rid of them? I mean, it's something that this administration hasn't seriously considered from that perspective as well.
I think you answered at least one of Michelle's questions, which she typed in the chat. I'll read the second part, which you didn't hit on. Also wondering if any of you can weigh in on the story today of Afrikaners arriving at Dulles Airport while all other refugees programs are halting. And then I think we have another question from Brandy.
Well, I'll jump on that since I just came from South Africa. a couple of weeks ago. And I talked to people there. They're South Africans that support the Trump administration, but I'd say most don't. And when I talk to the Afrikaners, most of them don't want to come to the U.S. I mean, this might be a selected group of people that are looking for a better life, and I think they're going to be in it for a surprise on it, because for whites in South Africa, life is not bad. The problem is, for the blacks that are living there, they're the ones that are really struggling. But I do also know that a lot of Afrikaners are looking for the future, and that's for their kids, not so much for them. They're not going anywhere. The elderly people, at least most of them, aren't. They settle there, and then there's a kind of a resentment building up, actually, for the Afrikaners and whites that stayed in South Africa, because when Mandela came to power, they stayed, and so they look at these outsiders who started to ask the question, should we come back? Because they went to Australia, they went to England, some went to America, and they tend to resent the people that left. So when you talk to various people, this is just a small group, and there may be others, but I think they're going to be in for a surprise in the living standards, or how they're going to live in the U.S. So.
Can I say something about that, unless someone else wanted to say something?
Sure.
Yeah, frankly, I think it's a finger in the eye of real refugee processing programs. I find it really distasteful, frankly.
Can you expand upon that just a little bit? Why a finger in the eye?
Trying to get me in trouble.
No, I'll leave you to your own devices.
Well, I mean, they've at the same time basically put a halt to refugee processing for people who actually meet the international definition of refugees, people who have suffered past harm or would suffer future harm because of their, specific categories, and to cherry pick a very particular group that, to Mel's point, do not seem to meet the actual refugee definition, undermines international law, undermines our national law, and just, it's just an insult, frankly, to those that do refugee work. We've all been touched in the refugee program to assist people who otherwise be subject to genocide or serious harms, and we're supposed to be the beacon for the world with refugees, and to do something like this, I just find it very distasteful and problematic.
I don't think I got you in trouble there. We don't have a question on the floor, so I'm going to ask one. Could, particularly from the diplomatic or the intelligence perspective, what are the impact on the kind of relationships we have, and how do those relationships work with our friends and our allies overseas, and also countries that are not quite our friends or allies, and what's likely to be the effect there?
I'll start if it's okay. It's a huge gift to Russia and China and to other dictators and autocrats, because the bottom line, and this is their message to the world, is, if the U.S. is going to do this, then why are you criticizing us? And that really weakens our argument against dictatorship and human rights abuses. Yes, it's true that what we're thinking of doing apparently is not original or unique, and Britain under the Tories had the proposal we've discussed about Rwanda. Italy is still looking at trying to deport illegal African migrants to Albania for cash. We have a history of relocating people we needed a home for, like the anti-Saddam rebels in Iraq and Iran, who we paid various countries to take. But this takes it a step further that we've really never done. As I said, even the horrific deportations of Mexicans and Mexican Americans in the 1940s was only basically sending people to Mexico who were either Mexican citizens, in which case it is deportation, or American citizens, in which case it was totally illegal. But still, there was a kind of logic there. But in this case, this is going to be very hard to explain. And then the other thing is, if this were focused, and I personally feel strongly about this, if this were focused on people in the United States who have committed serious felonies, and yes, immigrants, illegal and legal, do sometimes commit serious felonies, I would still have problems with the due process aspect of it. I would still have problems with the international law aspects. But what we're talking about here is a lot of people who really haven't done any significant thing wrong or being threatened with horrific consequences. And what that makes us look like in the rest of the world, if we send people to Libya and they're tortured, then we are torturers. It's a direct line. There's no disconnect there. We're responsible for what happens to them. So we're already in big trouble around the world in terms of our standing and public attitudes toward the United States. If this goes forward, I think it'll be devastating.
I'd like to go back to the legality issue in Libya. So my assumption, and it's assumption that I have proof of this, is that the Libyan deal was cut with Saddam Haftar during a recent trip to the United States last week. We don't recognize the Haftar-related government. We have been dealing with him lately and his family as part of an effort to ward off the Russians and to counter the Russians as a matter of U.S. policy by meeting with absolutely everybody. But we don't recognize the government that they're a puppet government in the East. And so there is no legal basis. We have not been negotiating with the government for it bilaterally. It's basically cutting a deal with a warlord and a warlord's family, which is really quite shocking if you take even a moment to think about it.
I think we had a question from Jose Pellier again. Jose, you're up.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up. We keep talking about like Rwandans doing this for the money or Libyan militias doing this for the money. Again, I want to get into specifics if we can. How does financing make sense for these militias or these government officials? I mean, it's a two-part question. The first is there any way for us journalists to track it? Who approves this? What entity delivers the money? We want to get into the nitty-gritty here about the way the money changes hands. I'd like to know, what official at Treasury signs the check? What official clicks the button? Is it Doge? Once it gets delivered on the other end, can we track it then? The second part I'm trying to understand here is there any reason to believe that these other entities could be profiting from these detainees, either by subjecting them to forced labor or selling them as human commodities? I mean, how do they come out on top here?
I'm going to speak to Libya because there are several points that are quite important that you've raised. The first is there is no lawful way for the United States government to pay Libyan militias for taking people that they've chosen to render. I can't think of any lawful mechanism. Congress hasn't appropriated funds for that, and it's not a government anyway. But in the case of Libya, the goal here, if it is the Haftars who are doing it, is not to get paid for the prisoners. It's recognition. It's a transactional bargain that binds the United States closer to them. It's essentially, I'll pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today. Okay, I'm giving you the hamburger today. You're giving me the hamburger today. I'll pay you down the line. So there will be various types of quid pro quos, but it will not be cash flows of the United States government.
In terms of Rwanda, I mean, I don't have the details of how the transactions occurred, but in the case of the UK, which is the most recent one, based on the papers, they paid 290 million pounds for a startup program in Rwanda, and that was to take asylum seekers and process them there. This and the Rwandans agreed to that. That was just the beginning of it. It's supposed to be about 700 million pounds total that they would do this. But fortunately for the asylum seekers, the British justice stepped in and said, basically, this is illegal, and that you can't do this. So the British government, embarrassed, they had to back down. And there was even a catch to this whole thing, which was even if the migrants were later found to qualify for refugee status while in Rwanda, they were expected to be resettled in Rwanda and never to return to the UK. It was just a way of getting them out of the country. It was a bad deal, but fortunately, the British justice system and a criticism from human rights groups stepped in to stop this. So I can't answer the question about the money flow and how that occurs and who gets the money. I'm certain the Kagame government gets it, and what they do with it, that's an unknown.
I think the thing to understand about Libya is that there's some militias, especially in the internationally recognized parts, that have been brought under the umbrella of the state, but they're still kind of militias that they operate with criminality and impunity. And the Libyan Coast Guard, which receives direct payments from the European Union, and that's something you could look into, Jose, is one such example, right? And they've been implicated in a lot of abuses. So I don't know, the exact mechanism within the European Union, but perhaps that's a precedent to look at.
And could I just add, there's another precedent that I think journalists writing about this should focus on, and that is the fact that the democratic country that started this was Australia about 20 years ago. And Australia basically paid Pacific Island countries to take migrants that the Australian Navy intercepted on the high seas. And the terms of that were that these people would be basically put in camps, and the biggest center was in Nauru, an independent country, but they paid several other Pacific Island countries, and the terms were that if you got intercepted on the high seas, you would have no opportunity to apply for refugee status in Australia, and you would either stay in these camps for the rest of your life or go back to your home country. Australia has ceased this policy. It became very controversial for good reason, but I think looking at the history of this, that is pretty much where it started in modern times.
Carrie, I see you have your hand up and answering here.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna explain some of the specifics. So the Department of Homeland Security does have an international sort of department, I don't know the right term, in their policy shop. And so they actually do engage with other countries as far as talking to them about taking people for deportation and the sort of more standard process. So so they would be doing quite a bit of outreach. Under the Anti-Deficiency Act, though, there's limits on what each executive branch agency can spend their money on. It can only be spent on money as authorized and appropriated by Congress. And so DHS is usually under quite a few limits on being able to give money to foreign countries for certain things because it's outside the scope of what they're appropriated for and directed to do by Congress. And so state usually is the one on the hook to be giving money to people overseas. So it's usually, some combination of the two agencies that will work on these kind of things. And as I mentioned, traditionally, if you're talking third country removal, it's really kind of a one-off one person here, one person there, and not these very large scale renditions that we haven't seen in recent times for obvious reasons we've discussed.
Well, let me throw something in there to Steve Katz talking. I spent a fair amount of time up on the Hill. Historically, when the U.S. government wants to spend money, even secretly, it comes through an appropriation process, and members of Congress, particularly on whatever committees have jurisdiction, and that would be the Intel committees, the appropriation committees, they're aware of it. I mean, the idea of somebody in the Department of Treasury just writing a check kind of thing, actually in the past, that didn't happen, at least not in recent history. And this goes back to the question that I think Brandy asked at the very beginning, is what when you're covering this, who to ask and what to ask up on the Hill. I would think it would be helpful to ask members of those committees of jurisdiction and the appropriators, where's the money coming from? Did you appropriate this? Because that is their responsibility. It's a hardball question. I fear you may not get an answer, and you may have to ask it a number of times. But the idea that we're in a situation where is the money coming from is a very hard question, is itself somewhat unprecedented. Doesn't answer your question, but it does say what the question could be and to who. So any more questions from the floor?
And I want to just add one point on Libya. They do make money by forced labor. That is one of the criticisms of the human rights groups for Libya's prisons. But that's clearly not the purpose of this deal. The purpose of this deal is political from the Libyan side.
We're a little bit early, so we have time for a few more questions or comments from our panel.
I have a quick question. My name is Mia. I'm with CBS News, Mia Salentry. So that maybe this is, naive question, because this hasn't happened before, sending people to third countries. But in the case that there would be forced labor, there is evidence of that. Is there a way, is there a process for which we would take those people back? Is that maybe too much of a moral question, or is there a legal obligation there to stop that in some way?
So I'll start. So the U.S. has both under domestic U.S. law and international law an obligation not to do two things. One is to remove or render or deport someone to a place where they would be tortured. So that's under the Convention Against Torture, which we have signed and ratified and codified into our own laws. The other piece is what internationally is called non-refoulement, which means you can't return someone to a place where they would be subject to harm or persecution. So harm for a particular reason, and that's written into our immigration laws. So and additionally, so this is back to what the court said for some of the people being rendered to El Salvador, and I think would apply here too, is to give people people need to have an opportunity to make those claims, to that they would be tortured or they would be subject to persecution, because even if some of these people actually went through the proper immigration process and had an immigration judge and the immigration appeals court order them deported, so they can be deported, I guarantee you they didn't get to present a claim of being deported to Libya. So they presented a claim to being deported to Laos or whatever other country they may actually be from. So there's that obligation, and then I think that we hold. And so to render someone to another country to then see the human rights violations, I think some of my colleagues can speak to the significant harm that would cause to the U.S. Reputation internationally, and then also really render some of these legal obligations almost meaningless if they're going to ignore the obvious facts on the ground moving forward.
Okay. Edward, your mic is open, but your hand's not up. Does that mean you want to talk or not? Shows up on my screen. Okay. Well, let me thank everyone. Let me thank everybody on our panel. At the bottom of the biographies you have, there's direct contact information for everybody who was on this panel. Feel free to email them, and I leave it to them if you want to have some follow-up. And this will be the first of a number of these that we're going to do. Happy to hear from any of you, not according to a schedule. If you are looking to talk to some of our members, or you have an idea of another quick hit like this that you think would be helpful to you and your colleagues, we'd be happy to do it. I encourage you to take a look at our website, and you'll see the outline of who we have. We do have a hand raised, so go ahead, Lita.
I just wanted to say one last thing. I'm sorry, I've interrupted you, Steve. I just think that, one of the lessons of this, and I thought of this when Mr. Gamble was, speaking about certain high-level U.S. policy figures that have had views on engaging with some of these characters, like whether that be Kagame or Haftar or whatever. Many of us obviously appearing on this call as experts, it's clear that we're not with the current administration, and yet, we also have to be open-eyed and critical of what's now the opposition party, the Democrats, and their willingness to sometimes, make these compromises for short-term gain. And we certainly, I think Jonathan mentioned our engagement with Haftar during the Biden administration, the long engagement with Kagame, and think about what that means, right? So we don't open ourselves up to the same criticisms that we're leveling against the current administration.
Okay. With that, last call for any questions or last remarks from anybody. And if not, I will say again, thank you. Jose has just raised his hand.
Just a quick one. I don't see the contact info, and I did want to reach out to a few of you afterwards. Can you please let me know where I can find that?
Sure. It's at the end of each biography, but I'm happy to send it to you.
Thank you very much.
U.S. policy towards Libya has been a two-administration mess, at least. Maybe three if you want to talk about Trump 1. That's another story.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Hope to see you all again on a future quick hit, and hear from you when you need some help.
Thank you, Steve.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.